So it's a great privilege to introduce John Stulp. For those that you don't know, he's the governor's special policy advisor and director of the IBCC, and I'm going to turn it over to him as moderator.
Well, thank you, Lorenz, and that's one of the risks you run to coming back to your home area is people know you real well, but then I also know things about Lorenz, so we're at a good stalemate here. So always good to be in the Arkansas Valley. This is certainly very good timing on the part of this forum to have this discussion about the water plan. There's no one knows the importance of water more than people live in a part of the state like this that is chronically scarce of water and value it highly, as do all people in Colorado that use it for their daily income. James set the stage well with the overview of the Colorado Water Plan and the task before us. And as you'll notice in his comments, as well as a couple of questions in the Q&A, that the Basin implementation plans from the 8 different basins that are going to be submitting them are the basis of the water plan. That's kind of the foundation, the building blocks. And then the IBCC has been able to take that information and have a continued conversation, perhaps more at a statewide conceptual level, to make recommendations on up to the Colorado Water Conservation Board. And so the 4 individuals that are going to come and give you an overview of their respective basins, I think will give you some insight to what the other basins are thinking about. And then those of you that are working on the Arkansas Basin Implementation Plan can certainly use some of those ideas or challenge some of those ideas. And so we hope to have presentations from these 4 individuals, a little bit of discussion, and then we're going to open it up for some Q&A. You've already seen the resumes, they're in your agenda, but I want to say a couple things about each one real quickly. Sean Cronin is recently appointed, elected as chair of South Platte Basin Roundtable, and about the same time there's this little thing called a 1,000-year flood that happened in the South Platte. And Sean has been one of those extraordinary leaders that not only does he have responsibility with his own irrigation companies that he's responsible for as CEO, but he was really a leader for the whole area in coordinating with local, regional, state, and federal agencies. And so he's really been doing double time. Mike Gibson from the Rio Grande has been a permanent fixture with the roundtable over there, I think from the conception, and providing leadership there. And forgive him that British accent, but it comes in handy sometimes. John McLeod from the Gunnison also wears multiple hats, as do all these other presenters. One is the Upper Colorado River Commissioner appointed by the governor to represent Colorado on matters that pertain to the Colorado River, and he's provided extraordinary leadership there as well as having leadership at the Colorado Water Congress along with Mike Gibson also. And then Jim Pokerand is the educational director and outreach chairman for the Colorado River District, and he's also chairman of the Colorado River Roundtable. And Jim, I think, has been extraordinary in reaching out to other roundtables and discussing the different issues that they may have in common, and certainly some that they may have in conflict. And I think you'll hear some of that discussion today. So without much more, help me welcome Sean Cronin for our first presentation.
Thank you, John. Can you hear me okay? Should I get up there? Where's my timer?
There it is.
Okay, great. You're my friend. So thank you for having me. This is my first time to La Junta. I'm pleased, though, to announce I have spent some money already to the city manager, and I brought in some return flows from Denver as well. So I imported some water while I was at it. So thank you for having me. You know, John mentioned I'm a recent addition to the roundtable process. By day, I'm the executive director of St. Vrain and Left Hand Water Conservancy District in Longmont. And as most of you know, in the roundtable process, the Conservancy districts get a seat at the table, and I think I missed a meeting and found out I became chair. So I've been chair for a couple years now, and it's been a great process. I've gotten to know Jay and Gary and Alan Hamill, and I'm pleased to let you know that you're in great hands here locally. As I mentioned, I'm with the St. Brandon Left Hand Water Conservancy District, so I feel a bit like I'm in the sister city, and reading the Bent's Old Fort and Coran St. Brain being located down here and helping out with that building of that fort and the trading. It's neat to be down here. So when I was in 6th grade, I had a history teacher named Mr. Walsh, and he had all sorts of quotes around the wall to inspire young minds. And I don't know that I was one of those that he had future hope for, but one of the quotes that was on there that always resonated with me is prior planning prevents poor performance. And throughout this entire process, I feel that quote running through my mind on a regular basis. And that's really what we're trying to set out to do with this water plan in my mind, is do something in advance to mitigate that poor performance. James let you know a little bit of a story on that I shared with a group of people last week, and that really drives that home. As John mentioned, we did have a little bit of rain in Longmont last September to the tune of about 18 inches over a 3-day period. Significant amount of precipitation. It's, depending on who you talk to, it's a 1,000-year rain or a 1,000-year flood. All I know, it was a honking lot of water, and we couldn't store it all. I was told by Nolan it's not going to happen again in my career, so I'm looking forward to finishing things out, but we'll see what happens. But what happened was the town of Lyons, which is just upstream of the city of Longmont, if you're familiar with that area, public infrastructure damage alone within the town of Lyons was to the tune of about $52 million. This is a community that lives and breathes with the river. They have a lot of recreation opportunities, festivals, and others that drive the economy in that community. $52 million in damages. They get about $1 million in annual tax revenue a year. So they had 52 years to pay their damages. No way that they could possibly pay that. So they had to turn to the federal government, and the sugar daddy for disasters is FEMA. So they turned to FEMA and said, could you help assist us with the damages? So FEMA agreed to do that, but once you agree to have FEMA write the checks, you have to do it by their design. So there's a Reacher River right there in Lyons. Colorado Parks and Wildlife has historically done fish counts in that area to the tune of about 8,000 trout per mile, give or take a couple thousand. That was pre-flood. Post-flood, they went in and sampled again, and they had about 6,000 trout per mile. If you were there and saw all the material that was being moved, I was personally surprised that there was that many that sort of survived that type of event, but they're much more resilient than us humans. And then FEMA went in under the design and had the cash and rechannelized the river to a trapezoidal channel, and they basically take a dozer from point A to point B and pull out all the material to save property and life. Parks and Wildlife went back in again and did a fish count, 8, single digit, trout per mile. So James really polished up what I said. What I said was, if you want to do things in the crisis, nobody's going to give a rip about the environment. And I stand by that. I've seen it firsthand. And the lesson learned there is, do you want the federal government helping you out, or do you want Coloradoans doing it? And do you want to do it when it's right in front of our face? And do we want that balanced approach where we're taking into consideration all the values and quality of life of all the state of Colorado and all the basins, what goes on here in La Junta, what goes on in Longmont, what goes on in Grand Junction? Do we want to consider all of that as a plan, a holistic approach? Or do we want to manage this in a crisis? And I'm here to tell you it's not pretty when you're managing in a crisis, and it comes down to people and safety. And I don't think we necessarily want to be a part of that if we saw this coming. It wouldn't be the responsible thing to do. So by night, I'm the chair of the South Platte Basin Roundtable, and we are in the throes of putting our basin implementation plan together. And we feel like on the South Platte, it's a really critical piece of the overall state water planning. effort, and when you get named out in the executive order, we really feel like it's our responsibility to put something together that we can all be proud of. So it says in the executive order, the South Platte Basin is our largest agricultural producing basin, and Coloradoans find the current rate of buy and dry is unacceptable. So for us, it's really embedded in there that what we need to produce is something that is acceptable. What can we as Coloradoans, not just the South Platte, but we as Coloradoans can live with going into the future. So there's a lot of agreement. I think there's, as James said earlier, there's more convergence than there is divergence. There's more areas that we agree upon, and one of those areas is conservation. The devil's in the details. There was a question asked earlier about can we do more, where's the education come from, and I for one feel as though we can do more, but there's a lot of conversation that needs to go around that. We feel like in the South Platte Basin in particular, we have demonstrated a commitment to conservation. Denver Water is clearly a national leader in that area. But we also have some smaller communities that spend well over $1 million in conservation, have landscaping restrictions, and do a whole lot in the area of conservation and are committed to that. We do feel like, for the most part in the South Platte, that more can be done. We're really wrestling with this idea of low, medium, high conservation that came out of this process. We feel like that it's difficult to lump conservation measures into low, medium, high, because as we all know with water, it's a very local issue. And what might be low conservation on a matrix for a community might be very high in terms of their financial resources as well as their community response. So we'll be crafting some language around that in our basin implementation plan. By and large, the South Platte Basin is not necessarily in favor of regulations, and we'd like to see more in way of incentive programs if that's going to come out of either the State Water Plan or the Gold Dome. As far as incentives, we did poll on this with the South Platte and the Metro roundtables, and just in way of an example, one of the questions that was asked is high efficiency standards in new residential and commercial development for plumbing fixtures, appliances, and landscaping. And 94% of the Metro strongly agreed with that statement, 39% in the South Platte. 6% in the Metro agreed, and 52% in the South Platte agreed with that. So we're not quite completely aligned, but we do feel like conservation is one of those critical areas that must be an emphasis in our basin implementation plan. The second part of our plan that we'll emphasize is multi-use objectives, and this is something that's got a lot of discussion going at the IBCC level here recently, and has really frankly been a part of our reality in the South Platte for some time. Those projects that are in permitting, and we have quite a few in the South Platte, there's not only the mitigation requirements by the federal government, but there's also local conversations of how can you develop that project for the benefit of consumptive use needs as well as provide environmental and recreational needs. And I feel like culturally in the South Platte, that's just going to be the new norm, and I think it'll be widely embraced. And whether that's a project on the West Slope, we'll talk about that I'm sure later, but here locally in our basin with regards to our projects, they most certainly will be multi-benefit. We must find a way to further promote ATMs. As was talked about, I think this basin has been a leader there. We're doing quite a bit of that in the South Platte. I, for one, don't have super high expectations that it'll yield as much water as perhaps some of the studies might say, primarily because of the infrastructure requirements that are necessary. And I don't think culturally as a basin we're prepared to invest in that type of infrastructure. But there are opportunities there with local water projects to be able to further advance the ATMs, and we're going to be emphasizing that in our basin implementation plan. The two areas that perhaps we don't have complete agreement as a state on are the two areas that we feel like in the South Platte are critical importance. The first is in the roundtable wonky talk IPMPs, or identified projects and processes. We have several projects that are in the permitting process through the NEPA permitting process on the South Platte. One that gets a lot of attention is the NISP or Glade Reservoir Project. And it's, as James mentioned, it used to be 3 years, $3 million. They're well into their, surpassing their 10th year of the permitting process. And as a South Platte Roundtable, we're incredibly dependent on the building of that reservoir to stave off, as James mentioned, that trajectory of buy and dry. The municipalities and water providers that are in that project specifically, their alternative and the universe of alternatives that they explain to the federal government is if they cannot get this project with that wet water, they will absolutely buy and dry. Some of those communities, even buy and dry is incredibly complicated. They don't have the sophistication to go to water court. They don't have the infrastructure to get the water from point A to point B to their water treatment plant. So you're going to see costs continue to rise, and it's going to have an economic ripple effect. So we are very passionate about wanting to see those IPMPs go through. And we want to ensure that in our basin implementation plan, there's an emphasis there, and hopefully be supported at the state water plan level. If the IPMPs are 40% successful, we feel as though we have about a 350,000 acre foot gap, and that's 40% success. If Eric Wilkinson was here, depending on the day, he might give you an odds on whether or not that project's going to be permitted. I don't know that I've ever heard 40% odds come out of his mouth because he's an eternal optimist, but there is some nervousness amongst the South Platte Basin as to whether or not all these IPMPs can get permitted. So at 40%, we're looking at a 350,000 acre foot gap. At 100%, so if all of the IPMPs that we've identified get permitted, we're still looking at a 100,000 acre foot gap. So at 100,000 acre foot, will that be ATMs? Will that be conservation? And other processes that we can bridge that gap. And I think we can do that. I think we can meet some of that 100,000 acre foot through all of that, but I do believe we will need some source of new supply. And those of you who've been tracking in the process, new supply has now been termed Trans Mountain diversions. So we will, as a South Platte, be putting some language together on Trans Mountain diversions. And we feel as though a conversation around Trans Mountain diversions, some progress around Trans Mountain diversions is very critical to our overall planning process. If we cannot have significant progress on Trans Mountain diversions, we as a state really have to start talking about how are we going to buy and dry to the best of our ability. And that's where it really gets uncomfortable, as if water wasn't uncomfortable enough. But I could envision a time, if we're talking about buy and dry, where we're actually pulling out a map and identifying really productive ground and saying, we'll keep that in production, and identifying the low productive ground and saying, we're going to dry that one up. And I, for one, will resign and not want to be a part of that conversation because it is going to be incredibly ugly and uncomfortable. So going back to the flood event and managing in a crisis, I think we should all be proud. I think we should be embracing this kind of process because it really allows us to have a conversation around how we want to plan for our future without A, managing in a crisis, or B, getting to the point of identifying productive ground and unproductive ground. I don't think that's where we want to be as a state. I don't think that's where we want to be as a South Platte Basin. I don't think that's where you want to be as the Arkansas. So I think the South Platte Basin Roundtable is really optimistic about what the future might hold, and we are going to be looking very closely at all the other basin roundtables and what the information they put together. And I'm looking forward to a conversation around that and looking forward to the discussion today.
Okay, let's thank Sean. Mike Gibson, the important question is it Rio Grande or Rio Grande?
Rio Grande.
Okay.
I was down in New Mexico and with a group of people, and an elderly gentleman said, every time you say Rio Grande, you put $1 in the pot. And everybody in the meeting had to put $1 in the pot, and I walked away with the most money at the end. Just wanted to thank I think we need to acknowledge the work that James and John are doing and the staff of CWCB on this process. They have a task ahead of them, and they have been driving the process in the basins, and sometimes that's very difficult, and sometimes those in the basin wonder, should we be doing the work or attending another meeting? But I'd like to acknowledge the work that both of those people and the CWCB staff do, and also the members of the board, because it's a difficult task, and we've taken on something as a state which is very difficult. I'd just like to point out that this is the furthest east I've been in Colorado. You'd think from coming from Texas that I would have been here before, but I haven't. A very welcoming community, I'd like to add, and so thank you for hosting this meeting. The Rio Grande Basin is a little different than the rest of the state. I used to live in the western slope on the ARBWF River, and I used to think Colorado was two places, the Front Range and the western slope. Well, there's a third part of Colorado, and that's the San Luis Valley and the Rio Grande Basin. A couple of drivers that impact what we do currently and what we will be doing in the future. The Rio Grande Compact is the #1 priority on the river. And today we have our irrigators being curtailed, I think, up to 10%, so that we meet the Rio Grande Compact commitments. This is going to get worse, and I'll just give you a little bit of background here. Our snowpack is somewhere in the 70s, 70% of average. We're going to do two things. One is we're going to move I-70 300 miles south. It always snows north of I-70. I'll be passing the petition around later. Anyway, we're at 74% of our average, and we've been suffering the drought since 2002 or so. Our friends in New Mexico, their snowpack is somewhere between 5 and 10% of average today, if you can believe that. So there's going to be a lot of pressure on Colorado to deliver more water than perhaps a compact requires us to do. And I can assure you that that will not happen. The other thing which is happening, and which has happened recently, there's an environmental group, Wild Earth Guardians, who are threatening to sue the state of Colorado for failing to send sufficient water south to support the silver minnow in the Rio Grande. And I think the position again that Colorado will take is we've been delivering our compact obligations. But these are the kinds of issues which is a backdrop for our basin plan and going forward. Two very fundamental things in our basin plan. One, that we will meet the Rio Grande Compact, and two, that we'll continue to support the power appropriation system. It's become apparent that we've been drawing down our aquifers due to pumping for agricultural purposes. And we've drawn down our unconfined aquifer some 1 million acre-feet since 2002. And the agricultural community recognized that this was an unsustainable situation. And we've got legislation passed to allow us to create groundwater management sub-districts. One of the big issues for the roundtable and for our basin plan will be the continuing support of that process. And basically there's sub-districts, a geographic area with similar hydrological characteristics. Farmers will pay into a pot. That pot will go out and buy water rights to make up depletions in the Rio Grande. It will also allow land to be fallow. And in the last 2 years, I think we've reduced our pumping by some 60,000 acre-feet of water. We've dried up over 16,000 acres of agricultural land, taken 16,000 acres out of agricultural production. So the issues confronting the basin going forward is how do we continue to support our agricultural community with this backdrop, and the basin plan obviously will have a large component continuing to support those efforts, and we have people considering how else we might be able to reduce the drawdown on our aquifer. The state engineer is going to issue well rules and regulations in the next 2 months. And we believe that they will require every well to be augmented. And we're not certain if it's a one-to-one relationship. That has not come out yet, or else that all wells, a well will have to be within one of these groundwater management sub-districts. So again, our basin plan will be addressing that, and we'll be acknowledging that. And hopefully, if we don't have methodologies to mitigate those issues, then the basin plan will acknowledge that this is what we need to do going forward. Talking about M&I is very small in the basin in comparison to our agricultural use of water. We don't see our growth being particularly large. The Rio Grande Basin, I think the total population maybe is 50,000 people. If you put a 2% growth rate on that, it's relatively small. So meeting our municipal requirements, we don't see being an issue, obviously. We will have by and by to meet those when it comes to having augmentation water for individual private wells and commercial and industrial wells. On the industrial side, we've had a boom in solar power with a lot of photovoltaic systems being put in. They require small amounts of water. We had one company considering putting in concentrated solar systems, and they were going to use an air dry system, an air cooling system, an air cooling system on the backside of their generating facility. So again, a facility like that, I think it was 100 megawatts, would use about 300 acre-feet of consumptive use, relatively small. So again, M&I we don't see as being that critical. One of the issues out there may be the development of oil and gas in the basin. We've had a number of runs at that. We had a well drilled last year that was eventually capped. But again, if you think about the industrial side, that may be one of the risks we have is oil and gas development, although we see that being relatively low. One thing about the Rio Grande Basin and the people in it is they've always had a strong recognition of the benefits and the value of environmental, the natural world. I use an example here. Back in the year 2000, a group of irrigators, farmers, ranchers, state and federal agencies sought funding from CWCB and did a holistic study, what I call a holistic study, on the Rio Grande from South Fork to the Alamosa County line. And that study addressed, it looked at the river conditions in a holistic way, condition of the floodplain, the conditions of the riparian zone, conditions of the fisheries. And that was driven by these agricultural producers. It wasn't driven by someone from the Harvard Environmental School who came out and said this is what the Rio Grande Basin should do. It was driven by local people who said the river is not functioning as it has done historically, and what can we do to address it? And since that time, there have been projects to address it. One of the things in that study, for instance, talked about the possibility of modifying flows in the river to support fisheries, so trying to mimic perhaps natural hydrograms. That was 10 years or so ago, and today we're talking about that. We have private irrigation companies talking with the Colorado Division of Colorado Parks and Wildlife, about can reservoirs be operated in conjunctively to support such a thing as that, such a goal as that. So as we look at our basin plan, the issue of the environment is and will be addressed. It's been addressed with many of our projects that have received funding through the Water Supply Reserve Account, and we see that being a continuing process. Excuse me. Associated with the environmental side is the recreation side. We have Goldwater fisheries for trout. We have some floating of the Rio Grande, and projects are now addressing things like fish passages and boat passages in irrigation diversion structures and things like that. So going forward, we think that the environmental recreational aspect will be addressed in our basin plan as it has done in the past. And one of the interesting things is to develop our basin plan, we set up 5 committees: agriculture, water management, which would address the issue of the compact, these different flows in the river, environmental and recreation, education, and M&I. And every one of those committees, if you looked at their goals that they developed for each of their committees, every one of those committees address the issue of agricultural sustainability, address the issue of the environment and recreation. And so I'm very optimistic that our plan will be very comprehensive going forward. Now, the one thing our plan is not going to do, I'm afraid, it's not going to solve the so-called gap on the Front Range. So when there have been discussions, recent discussions of the mountain diversions under the guise of new supply, we've elected at this point in time to sort of stay out of that discussion. That may be the easy way out, but at the same time, we're not really a player in that. Historically in the basin, there have been attempts to take water out of the basin, and the basin communities have fought that very rigorously. So unless someone decides to invest in a pipeline over the Santa Crista Mountains, we feel pretty comfortable that our water will remain in the basin. Our whole economy is agricultural based, and so the issue confronting the drawdown of our aquifers and the fact we're addressing that, we believe we have a big enough problem as it is. We have a gap already with that drawdown of 1 million acre feet over 10, 12 years. We're also suffering this drought issue, and one of the things that we in our plan would also at least acknowledge the impact of climate change. This was already on the table that the Basin Plan would at least acknowledge that we could see impacts from that. But recently the Corps of Engineers out of Albuquerque have done a study on the Upper Basin, Rio Grande Basin, and predicting a 35% reduction in precipitation over the next 50 to 100 years. We're going to have less snow. We're going to have more unpredictable, large precipitation events, typical to the ones which have been experienced elsewhere in the state. And so our plan will acknowledge that, and we will be trying to address that. We heard about the ability of ditch companies to take water during these high water events, and the fact that the infrastructure was washed out. These are things which we won't have answers to by July, but there'll be certainly issues which have been identified which will require further work and further study. So I'm optimistic that our plan will be relatively comprehensive. As I say, the only aspect that it will not really be addressing is the broader issue of the 600,000 acre foot gap relative to the growing population of Colorado. We feel good about that we're not involved in that discussion, but we're sorry that we're not contributing to closing that gap in some way. Now, the other roundtables and the other basins may have in their plans a little footnote talking about the Rio Grande Basin. If you do, we'll be having a discussion about that footnote. So I think I've said enough, but I'll be pleased to answer questions on this.
Okay, let's thank Mike. John McLeod wears so many hats, but I think he's more comfortable with the Gunnison hat than any of the others. And so, John, what's going on in the Gunnison?
Thank you, John. Well, the Gunnison Basin Roundtable has been working hard on an implementation plan. I've been a member of that roundtable since the first meeting 8.5 years ago. To switch our slide here, we spent the first 2 years getting to know each other. Compared to the Arkansas Basin, the Gunnison is relatively small, but it's very diverse, and because we are divided by the geography, we're not close to our neighbors often. In the North Fork and the lower part of the basin and the upper part of the basin, we had different interests and different ideas and some suspicions about each other, but those have been resolved remarkably well. We are now speaking very much with a unified voice. But the second characteristic of the basin is paranoia, because this Gunnison Basin has been referred to often as the last untapped basin. Well, it's not the last, but it is certainly untapped, and we are hoping to keep it that way for the foreseeable future. My day job, I'm general counsel for the Upper Gunnison River Water Conservancy District. We spent 17 years in water court and went twice to the Supreme Court proving that there is no unappropriated water in the Gunnison Basin. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is still the case. So our plan is first and foremost defensive, in that our highest priority, which we reiterate at every meeting, is protect existing uses. We have a relatively small projected M&I gap. It's about 6,500 acre feet in the next 50 years. The Montrose area is targeted for significant growth, but as in Rio Grande, it's relatively small compared to Denver, but in percentages, it's about 200% of the existing population. So in a microcosm, we do have an issue of converting agricultural use to M&I use and having municipal areas grow out overproductive agriculture. In the Upper Gunnison Basin, our agriculture is hay and cattle. The ranchers grow hay in the summertime, and in that period, their cattle graze in the National Forests and BLM on permits. And in the wintertime, they're fed that hay, and their primary income is cow-calf operations. As you move down the river into the Uncompahgre Valley, it's irrigated agriculture. It looks an awful lot like La Junta. The Uncompahgre project irrigates about 80,000 acres around Montrose and Delta. In the North Fork, which is the North Fork of the Gunnison River, it's a very diverse agricultural economy, but there are a lot of orchards, peaches, apples, and vineyards in that area. So that's very sensitive agriculture in terms of water supply. About 90% of the consumptive use of water in the Gunnison Basin goes to agriculture. So protecting agricultural uses is a high priority as well. But Sean made an important point that I think I want to reiterate as well. Part of the exercise we have been going through in Gunnison is remembering that we are Coloradans, and remembering that it may be necessary for us to make a contribution for the good of the state. And at the last roundtable meeting, we made a remarkable breakthrough in having a consensus say we could consider a trans mountain diversion if it met certain criteria. And now I've seen some press reports that indicate the criteria are so tough that it would be impossible, but that's not the objective of the conversation. We do want protections. We do want to see the receiving basin put in place, extraordinary conservation, reuse, before the decision is made to move the water from the west to the east. And we also have to consider our compact obligations. As James pointed out, Colorado is a party to 9 compacts, one of which is the Colorado River Compact. Under that compact, the states of the Upper Basin, Wyoming, Utah, New Mexico, Colorado have an obligation not to deplete the flow of the Colorado River below a certain level. And every drop we take out of the Colorado River system reduces that flow a little bit and creates a little bit more risk that perhaps we won't be compliant with that compact at some point in the distant future. So risk management is our number 2 priority after protecting existing uses. Risk management is a concept that we're working very hard on that we think needs to apply to any new developments of Colorado River system water. And our roundtable and 2 of its committees are devoting a lot of energy to coming up with a proposal to manage the risk of developing additional water in the Colorado River system. The rest of the plan is relatively mundane. It is addressing the issues that affect every part of the state. We have aging infrastructure, both municipal and agricultural. We have an agricultural shortage. And it's not just a natural shortage where there's not enough snow and rain. We have areas where some storage or structural improvements could reduce the shortage, and we're looking at finding those areas, identifying the solutions, and figuring out how to pay for them. We also have a strong recreational economy in the basin, particularly the Upper Basin. The Kerr County Recreation Area, just west of Gunnison, receives about 1 million visitor days a year. And that's a remarkable influence on the economy for Gunnison County and the surrounding area. A county with a population of 15,000 people seeing that many visitors. They bring about $45 million a year into the local economy. It's an aspect of that reservoir system that we think needs to be protected as well. But additional recreation occurs in the streams and rivers. Boating is a major industry. Fishing is a major industry. Stream fishing as well as the flatwater. And so we're working to identify the critical non-consumptive uses that contribute to that industry. I should also mention skiing because they need water to keep the snow on the ground. Sometimes they need to pump it out of the stream in order to maintain adequate skiing. And we're trying to work hard to make sure that the non-consumptive uses and recreational uses are compatible with agriculture and that they contribute to each other, and we want to improve that relationship. I think that about describes the plan, so I will stop there and wait for questions.
Okay. Thank you, John. Let's thank John. Jim, I think in your resume it mentioned that you had done several things with ski resorts in the past. Does that mean you're a ski bum?
Yeah, I'm an employed ski bum.
Okay.
Our slide will be coming up on the basins here in a minute, but just like to say hello. It's a nice town. I had breakfast at the Copper Kitchen, and for that greasy spoon breakfast I so crave, and I got it. And the guy who runs the place, who's running the cash register, he says, "You're not local, are you?" And I was like, "No, how could you tell?" And I was thinking, okay, it's the white shirt, but I'm just trying to keep up with how well dressed these guys are. So, but anyway, I said, I'm here for the Arkansas Water Forum, and he said, "Oh, I've been reading about that a lot. And by the way, we tell them we don't want to lose any more water out of our basin." Also got a weather report from a local that you get the wind, but you don't get the moisture. So sorry about that. That's a tough situation. I know we're actually in the epicenter of some of Colorado's driest conditions down here, and hopefully things improve. Yeah, we're up. This past December, I went to Israel for 2 weeks, and I saw the light, and it wasn't spiritual, it was about water. And I can assure you that once conditions either get dire enough, and we get smart enough, and we get collaborative enough, we'll do the right things. And it's surprising what you can do with a little bit of water. Just for your information, the Dead Sea is really dead. The Sea of Galilee is really a reservoir. And the Jerusalem Post every day posts reservoir levels on the front page, and they always report when it rains what the reservoir is going up or it's going down. And actually, in recent years, the Sea of Galilee has been going down. A news story broke when I was there, and despite the firing of rockets and jet fighters, F-16s flying all around, the Israelis, the Palestinians, and the Jordanians struck a water deal. And what's going to happen is they're going to build a new desal plant at Aqaba. If you remember Lawrence of Arabia, that's the town that Lawrence of Arabia, Peter O'Toole took over on the Red Sea. But they're going to build a new desal plant. There's already one on the Israeli side, but Israel's buying into that, and the water's going to go up the Negev desert, which is very, very dry. But they'd like to bring more settlement down to the Negev. And then from the Sea of Galilee, the reservoir, Israel's going to sell more water to the Palestinians, to the West Bank, and try and help foster some growth there. And Jordan's going to benefit also from the new desal plant. So if they can do it, and they're firing guns in the meantime, and we're not doing that. I think there's hope. But the one thing I did see on a kibbutz was a green lawn, and I even took a picture. One of these days I'm going to remember to put that in my presentation, because that kind of symbolizes what we're up against and how we like to live and what we like to see outside our doors. But I guarantee you, that lawn was green, and it was gray water at best, because they really know how to use and reuse water. So I'm very comfortable about the future. All the technologies out there, all the science and abilities to irrigate and treat waters out there, and we just have to figure out what we're going to best do for Colorado, which is why we're here. And I need to tell you about the Colorado River Basin. Right now the rivers are raging, and that's partly because we've had a warm spell of 11,000 feet, and it hasn't gone below freezing for most of a week. And so right now flows are 3 and sometimes 4 times above the mean average for this time of year. And part of that is accelerated by D3 and D4 dust storms that we had, 3 or 4 weeks ago, which also makes the skiing pretty lousy and ugly. So the melt's been accelerated, but maybe it'll slow down this weekend. We're supposed to get some more snow, but the rivers are raging, and that's because the snowpack is really great in the Colorado. It's great in the South Platte. Apparently it's good in the Arkansas too. But the Colorado is already a donor basin to the Front Range. If you look to the map, you see the red arrows pointing to the east. That there's a lot of water already moving to the Front Range, depending on the water year, between 450 and 600,000 acre feet. And this year, because of the good snowpack, the Fry Arc project is going to take probably 73,000 acre feet, could be more. Twin Lakes is going to take 55,000 acre feet. Who knows, it might be more. And both of those are about 25,000 acre feet more than usual. But I'm really curious about Pueblo, Paul, through the Boscado Tunnel. You usually take 2.5 or 2.5 thousand acre feet, 2,500 acre feet. You're only going to take 1,500 acre feet this year. It's like, okay, what's up with Pueblo? And then if you go further north, on our Trans Mountain diversion picture there, Denver water in a normal year takes about 120,000 acre feet. This year they'll probably take more, and the sad irony is they'll be begged to take more because human beings being what we are, we've developed closer to stream banks, and below Silverthorne, if the flows get above 1,800 CFS, then there's property damage and all that stuff. And then the Colorado Big Thompson project is, the big project that started it all up in Greene County and taking water to northern Colorado. On a normal year, they take about a 250,000 acre feet, and I'm sure they'll take more this year. And it looks like Granby's going to fill, Lake Granby, which is a 530,000 foot reservoir. So it's certainly a good year. If you look to the west on our map, toward the Utah line, that's the other center of gravity in our water world. It's just not the water moving to the east, it's water moving down to the senior agricultural rates in the Grand Junction area. Grand Junction developed about 1884 when the Utes left, and that's about when the first water right is. And there's a whole suite of them that go up into the early 1900s, and they really rule the river, as does the Shoshone Power Plant, which is in the middle. You can't really see it, but it's a hydroelectric plant that Excel runs with very senior water rights, and we really like them because they pull water down the river under a 1902 water right, and when that water right is in operation, because it's non-consumptive, it goes a long way to satisfying the Grand Junction irrigation call. Although that didn't work last year because last year was a leaner water year. But and I'm sure we're going to have a free river for a long time during this runoff. We had a roundtable summit in early March, and one of my colleagues took the air out of the room, and he said the Colorado Basin Roundtable doesn't think there's any additional water for additional Trans Mountain diversions, and there was a little bit of a gasp. But so you have to understand the context of that. The context is what I just told you about the amount of water already gone over, and then you also, it helps to understand that we still face 150,000 acre feet of additional development. Denver Water has unexercised water rights out of the Dillon system. We have two IPMPs that we've actually negotiated with Front Range entities. We have the Colorado River Cooperative Agreement, which is between Denver Water and 42 West Slope entities, and that's basically to clear away opposition to firming of the Moffett project in Grand County, but it also take a little bit more water out of Summit. And we can talk more about that later, but that's certainly a paradigm for how to talk about future development, to the extent that development could occur once we answer tons of questions, some brought up by John. But it was really a new paradigm, and for sure Denver Water is going to scrape more off the top of the hydrograph. But what they're going to also work on is allowing headwater entities in Summit County to actually have some water supply, a little water in Dillon, and some other sources, so that takes care of some of their M&I needs. And there's also a very concerted environmental program to look at where there's issues in streams that are already hammered by past diversion. So it's a win-win deal. And Denver Water, got to give them a lot of credit. They're putting a lot of money on the table, and they got the West Slope to back off of that much hated not one more drop. So we're working on that. That's an IPMP that should move forward. I mean, right now probably the bigger issues are on the Front Range. I don't know what's going on with Boulder and the expansion of Gross Reservoir. And then the other IPMP that we're working on is the Windy Gap Firming Project. The Windy Gap Firming Project is kind of a cousin to the Colorado Big Thompson Project. The Colorado Big Thompson Project has used the wheeled water pumped from a different point in the Colorado Fraser River system. And that came along so late that the water rights in a bad year aren't in priority. And in a good year, in a couple good years, if there's no room in Granby to store the water, then they can't pump. So they're kind of, you know, they need average years where the reservoir's not full and their water rights are a priority, but that's certainly not getting the yield that they all thought they were going to get back in the 1980s. So Northern, which operates the municipal sub-district of some different entities that aren't part of the CBT and are part of the CBT, you know, they approached Grant County and the West Slope, and again, there was a new paradigm negotiation, and there's going to be provisions for water storage for the West Slope and a lot of environmental considerations. Grant County already signed off on a 1041 permit, which is huge, and right now that's all caught up with the Bureau of Reclamation and the carriage contract, and you know, that's a whole different set of dynamics. So we are working. We have worked and we are working with Front Range entities on water development. Within that same context, we have the Eagle River Memorandum of Understanding, and that's between Colorado Springs, Aurora, and some Eagle County entities in the Colorado River District, and that contemplates 30,000 acre-feet of water development, 10 each for the Front Range and 10 for the Eagle County entities. And that's definitely going to be an IPP in our Basin implementation plan. And I can tell you right now, there's discussions on doing some investigations on geological investigations on, you know, where there could be some diversions or some water storage up in the Homestay Creek area. So that's the context of what we say when we don't think there's any more water to develop in the Colorado main stem basin, other than what we're already doing and what's contemplated out there. And if you put it in round numbers, 150,000 acre feet, yeah, would you like to have that? That's a whole other Trans Mountain diversion. That's two times what the Fryar project is going to take this year. So that's huge in our lives, and that's the context in which we say we don't think there's any more water to develop in the Colorado main stem. Now, you can go down below the junction of the Gunnison and the Colorado rivers. It's a free river down there. You're past the critical reach for the endangered fish, where there's a programmatic biological opinion. And of course, that's where one of the big projects was envisioned. The Big Straw is a free river there, but you know, that's also the dirtiest water in the system, and the people seem to have shied away from that. But you know, the larger questions are still the ones that are, Mike's talked about the example of what happens when you overdevelop. In the Arkansas, you know what happens when you overdevelop. There's a $34 million lawsuit, and now, you know, if an ag producer wants to be highly efficient in the ARC, the Division II engineers climb all up and down he or she, you know, because you're worried that you're going to grow more green stuff, and Kansas isn't going to get its water. The Republican River is another example of where, you know, people are being paid to undevelop land, and the Colorado Basin Roundtable doesn't want to have that kind of future for the Colorado River Basin. And why would we? Why would we want to go into compact administration and turn our world upside down? Because who gets called out if there is a compact curtailment? It's Aurora, it's Denver, it's Colorado Big Thompson project, it's Pueblo, it's the Fryar project. And, you know, there's going to be a world of hurt there. So it's in everybody's interest to really understand these issues about compact curtailment and how much water can be developed where before you're going to get in a heap of trouble. And our concern on the Colorado Basin Roundtable is that if we don't think through this clearly, we overdevelop the river. By the time you put water into people's spigots, you're not going to take it out. You're not going to take it out of the fire hydrant. So the default's going to be condemnation of West Slope Ag. So this whole twist of, you know, Front Range Ag is certainly on the hook and being skinned alive right now on the Front Range. And the concern is to save, or at least keep Front Range Ag sustainable. If we go wholesale into a big Trans Mountain diversion that kicks us into compact curtailment issues, and then the default is to condemn West Slope Ag. Then you've taken out West Slope Ag, and that's not good planning in my view. And if that's really what the backstory is, then that's pretty Machiavellian, but we're onto it. So, meanwhile, inside our basin, the purpose of these basin implementation plans is to best understand what's happening inside your basin for your own environmental and water supply issues, and to come forward into the tougher discussion, which has been alluded to here, with the best informed, to be as best informed as possible, so that you can have fruitful discussions. And so we are thinking about that, and we are certainly thinking about the environmental issues that we already have. We've done some exhaustive environmental studies, and we have, I can't remember the number, 62 critical reaches that are hammered in some form or fashion, either by temperatures, poor stream flows, endangered fish issues, and things like that. And money's an issue that was raised. James said that there's state has finite funds, and that's certainly true. But they're even more finite when you're coming to environmental remediation. And even though Windy Gap and the Colorado River Cooperative Agreement will provide some funding for some of those kinds of projects, but by and large, that is where you're going to get money from, at least under the current paradigm. That is where you're going to get money for environmental remediation, and that's from water development projects. So, that's an interesting irony there. I think that I've said enough, and I think the fun part about this will be further discussion, so I'm all for starting with that.
Okay, let's thank Jim. I want to ask the panel a question that come out of the discussion I had with Basin Roundtable over in the southwest part of the state. They're not on the panel this morning, but they pointed out one of the bigger surprises they had was when they started doing their basin implementation plan. They started looking through their past work, and initially the roundtables were charged with doing assessments of what their consumptive and their non-consumptive needs in their basin were, then what resources they had available, and how they were going to try to solve them. And so the question of the panel is going to be, have there been any surprises if you've been working on these basin implementation plans? Because it was reported back to me, they said, we got more of our identified projects and processes accomplished than we realized. Because as they started down through that list of projects and processes they had in mind, over the last 8 years through the Water Supply Reserve Account and other funding from the Conservation Board, they've been able to accomplish some of those and do a number of studies. And so I'm going to go in the same order. Sean, I'll start with you to see have there been any pleasant surprises or any not so pleasant surprises as you've been putting your implementation plan together?
Yeah, thank you, John. I think on the consumptive side, there haven't been too many surprises. We had a pretty firm idea of what our gap was. We're refining that and going through, retouching base with all the water providers to identify if those numbers need to be tweaked or modified, or the timing needs to be tweaked. On the non-consumptive side, we have learned a great deal and still have a long way to go. One of the things that I failed to mention in my opening remarks was, it was mentioned earlier by James, the Metro Roundtable, which is not a Metro Basin Roundtable, but the Metro Roundtable and the South Platte Basin Roundtable joined forces for a South Platte Basin implementation plan. It only makes sense. One other thing that we did with the Basin implementation plan is we hired a consultant team for the consumptive side, and we hired a separate consulting team for the non-consumptive side, and we secured Water Supply Reserve Account dollars for each of those separately. And the thinking behind that is we needed to make sure we had an emphasis and focus on the non-consumptive side. So that allowed us to be able to make sure that there was adequate resources dedicated to the non-consumptive conversation. And we found that was lacking over the last 8 or so years of effort at the Cell Plat Roundtable. And so we're learning a great deal. As I mentioned, however, we have a great deal more to go. We just don't have the time or the dollars to really dig deeper, as deep as we want to in that process.
Okay. Mike?
Thank you, John. One of the early things that around the Rio Grande Basin did was a recognition that we had a number of reservoirs which could not hold their design capacity for a variety of reasons, a number of which were related to the size of spillways, and we had limitations placed on the reservoirs by the state engineer and dam safety people. I'm very pleased to say that we decided to tackle that, and we've been able to do that with a number of our reservoirs. And at the end of maybe this time next year, major work will have been done on the majority of the reservoirs, except for the Rio Grande Reservoir, which needs a new set of outlets. While that's recognized and it's in the planning stage, that work has not been done. So we're fortunate in that regard. The other aspect that I think we recognized early on was the role of the non-consumptive use and how important that was. And as a consequence of that, we've continued with river restoration work and also conservation easements. Conservation easements we view as a means to keep water on the land in its historical uses. And our local land trust identified properties along the Rio Grande and along the Canaas River that they normally targeted because it's recognized that those wet meadows along the river provide a mechanism for high water, addressing high water issues, and also low water when there's wet meadows will drain out. So I think we've been very fortunate in the work that we continue to do. One thing I didn't mention earlier was the fact that we had a major fire that I think John or James alluded to, over 100,000 acres. And out of that came a recognition of the importance of watershed health. And we started down that path last year with a group of people coming together, working with the U.S. Forest Service, identifying what needed to be done in the immediate future relative to the potential of unusual flows, debris flows coming off those burn areas into the rivers and streams. And the outcome of that has been a major effort relative to health and safety, and emergency managers working together in a number of counties. That has now expanded. That effort is now increasing, and one of the things going forward will be addressing this broad issue of watershed health, and that relates not only to private lands but also to the public lands, and the need to work collaboratively with those players. And the work that Gary Barber has been doing relative to watershed health has in fact acted as a confirmation of the tack that we were taking, that this is something that I think all of the basins need to address, obviously, when it comes to water supplies, and then looking at the risks of the infrastructure as it relates to flooding and things like that. So I think these plans are going to be, we're going to have some very specific things in each of our plans, but I think also the plans are going to have identified areas which are going to need more work, and that more work may take 5 years, may take 10 years. But in that sense, I'm very encouraged at the value these plans will have.
Thank you, John.
the question is, did we have any surprises? We had some modest surprises in discovering municipal shortages in the basin, particularly in the smaller communities, but in the larger ones as well. And in the past, the work that has been done in developing the supply and demand issues in the basin has been done by consultants. And remember, I told you that we're paranoid, and that's not changed very much. So when the consultants knocked on the door and said, "City, we'd like to know about your supply and demand," the answer was, well, who wants to know? Maybe we'll share it, maybe we won't. But the publicity that this Colorado's water plan has developed has brought these people forward now, and the roundtable members have become more active individually in approaching the municipalities and water districts and saying, you know, we really do have a good idea here, and if you have a problem, we can help you solve it, but you've got to give us accurate information. And so we have discovered that there are municipal shortages that we were unaware of in the past just because they wouldn't talk. And now they're seeing this as a positive effort, and we're getting a lot more information and working on ways to meet those demands.
I think in the Colorado, one of the surprises was that a lot of the water providers would like to have some small reservoirs up on some streams. And one of the entities that would like to keep that dream alive is the city of Aspen, believe it or not. And I guess, you know, they didn't take any notes when Pickens County fought a small augmentation reservoir up the Crystal River in Watercourt, and so those conditional rates went away. But, you know, I guess the realization there is that not everybody feels secure going forward, that they can survive a long-term drought and or climate change. But also, a happy realization was an allying, I think, of the recreational and environmental folks with ag folks, because it became obvious that a lot of the main stem basin's recreational economy were playing on ag water, moving down, as I showed, to the Grand Junction area. So there's a lot more in common there and than there is not. So I think that's a happy result. And the other thing we found out in this process is the Metro Roundtable had put out a white paper on conservation, and they talked about their goal of getting down to 129 gallons per capita per day, and they want our help. They said they think they can get to 129 gallons per capita per day. This is the Denver metro area on their own through mechanisms in place, but they want our help. And what that means, it's maybe trying to, and we're going to give it, and that's part of what we're going to put in our plan, but to try and help create the political will to achieve lower gallons per capita per day, because I really believe it's all going to come down to that, in one sense, driving that down across Colorado, and you interlace that with the irrigation footprint from new growth, not to mention what's already existing. But anyway, that's my spiel.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to, before we go to the audience, I'd like to ask the panelists if they have any other comments they'd like to make based on what they heard from some of the other roundtables. I'd like to mention also that the roundtable chairs, people like three of our panelists this morning that herd cats, and I heard a new phrase the other day, like it's the only thing worse than herding cats is herding balloons. But anyway, with the many different opinions, that sometimes happens. And so the chairs have been meeting on a regular basis, sometimes by conference call, to help coordinate what they're doing, also coordinate with their basin implementation plan contractors. And I think that's been another step that's been helpful in developing this statewide plan. And so do you have any questions of each other at this point before we go to the audience?
I just want to make a comment, if I may. One of the unique things about the Rio Grande Basin, I think, is the fact that all of our municipalities use groundwater. No surface water is used for municipal uses. And so These new well rules and regulations, you've got municipalities now who are saying, oh my gosh, what do we have to do with this? And those conversations are now taking place. And some of us have been trying to talk to the municipalities for the last 2 or 3 years, saying, you've got an issue in front of you. And some of those municipalities have wells in the confined aquifer, what we define as the confined aquifer. And one of the big issues will be that if the well rules and regulations require some form of augmentation, will be how do we augment the confined aquifer. It's currently recharged primarily on the western margins of the valley where the alluvial goes up against the mountains. That's primarily how the confined aquifer is recharged. Excuse me. So these are some of the issues that our municipalities are going to be having to address. And another group of entities which have been relying on groundwater have been national wildlife refuges. And so they have wells. And they're now sitting together as a group having discussions as to how they're going to address this whole issue of augmentation of those wells. And from the roundtable standpoint, I think we are committed, and the Basin Plan will be committing ourselves to continuing to work collaboratively with these different entities so that they can accomplish what they need to accomplish. Thank you.
Okay. Let's go to the audience, and do you have any questions you'd like to ask some of these panelists? Yes, sir.
Yes, I think I have a two-part question. One would be first part to Sean, and the second part would be followed up by John McLeod. My concern is, you said that there's going to be a lot more ag transfers if we don't get increase in Travis Mountain water. My question is, how much more water do we need by 2050 to meet the gap on the east slope? And then the second part of that question is, if we do transfer that from the Colorado River, is that going to cut into the 10-year average that we have to meet the compact? And if so, what's the chances then the compact, based on Lake Powell's current level and Lake Mead, of the lower states demanding a compact call, even if we're meeting that 10-year average?
Yeah, so the question was, how much water are we going to need to meet the gap needs on the east slope or in the South Platte? We're still refining some of the numbers that were done as part of SWASI. One of the items in the scope of work that we added in there was trying to further identify the location of the gap in terms of perhaps on a county level, or drill down even further. And then specific timing of the gap, because that seems to have been a question by a lot of folks. So we're further refining it, but the numbers range from anywhere from 100,000 to 400,000 acre foot gap. And my point was, if the other legs of the stool could meet some of that, but then what's remaining, what are we going to do to achieve that? So I don't have a firm number for you right now, but we'll be working through that in our basin implementation plan.
As to the Colorado River Compact, the requirement of the compact is that the upper basin states not deplete the flow at Lee Ferry, Arizona, below 75 million acre feet on a 10-year running average. Right now, the running average is about 90 million acre feet, just a little bit less. So we're ahead of our average requirement for the upper basin, but compact curtailment is a very complicated issue. Through the years, the states have agreed to disagree on a number of legal issues that relate to the compact and the amount of water that must be released to the lower division states. So the best way to approach it, in my view, is not to think so much about compact curtailment, even though that's ultimately the risk out there in the distant future, but rather to look at the supply. The Colorado River supply is extremely variable, and there are years in our history, 2011 is one in recent history, where there would be water available to move to the east side of the divide. There are other years, and unfortunately in the last 14, that's most of it, where there is no supply that would be available. And depleting that flow significantly does create a risk under the compact. But a more immediate risk is the fact that a project would be developed and there would be insufficient supply to satisfy the demand of the project. So if you build a 200,000 acre foot reservoir to protect the agriculture in Bell County, which is not necessarily a bad thing, that reservoir may only fill one time in 10 years. So that's the risk management exercise that we in the Gunnison Basin are so focused on. Not the risk of compact curtailment, because that's a distant risk for many reasons. But the risk that the supply is insufficient to meet the demand that the project would put on the system. But ultimately, yes, every drop that goes east is fully consumed, does not go into the Colorado River, and does not get to the lower basin, and does not contribute to our obligation in the compact.
Jarrison.
Thank you, John. I have a question for Mr. Boca. At the last IBCC meeting, the Yampa White Basin argued very strongly for a permanent allocation of unused compact waters in perpetuity. Has your basin taken a position on that?
What John is referring to is an intramural West Slope discussion about developing water for the West Slope, by the West Slope for the West Slope. And that's become a tricky question, and certainly the Yampa White has landed hard on this idea of equitable apportionment. Nobody's sure what that means, but what they don't want to do, what they don't want is to be left out. If there can be any more West Slope water developed for the West Slope, this is where, you know, then we're almost competing. And you know, say if John in the Gunnison was to develop a big project for multi-use going east, going west, and that takes you up to the compact math, and everybody else is zeroed out, that's where the Gunnison is saying, whoa, you know, no, you can't zero us out. We were the last basin to develop. Yeah, but what did I say? No, now you're making me paranoid.
But just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not after you.
So Jairus' question is, has the Colorado Basin Roundtable taken a position on that? And we have not, but this is a continuing discussion of the West Slope Caucus. We have gatherings about every month or so, mostly by telephone. We had one yesterday, and that topic came up, and there's no solutions. And you know, there won't be by July 30th. But yeah, that's an intramural West Slope issue where we might be fighting among ourselves.
I can tell you, Jairus, that in the Gunnison Roundtable we have addressed this specifically, and we don't support the carve-out theory. We think that every development of water in the Colorado River system, whether it's developed in Gunnison or Steamboat Springs or Glenwood Springs or for Denver, should go under the same rules. That is, that every development needs to survive the risk management analysis on an equal basis. That's the way we feel about it in the Gunnison. I will say that we've been listening very carefully to what the folks in the Yampa are trying to accomplish with this carve-out. At this point, we don't quite understand it, so our answer is no, as of today. But as Jim points out, we are having frequent conversations, I think all trying to better understand what it is the Yampa is suggesting. And maybe we'll find a way to work with them on that.
I'm sure we'll hear more about it at the April 29th IBCC meeting.
More to come, Harris.
Oh, right there.
I'm curious to the board in general, what efforts are oriented in the Basin implementation plans for conservation? And the reason I ask this is because I'm curious whether or not minimizing how much water is spent on consumption would be more effective rather than efficient allocation. to how much of the efforts in the Basin implementation plans are oriented towards conservation?
I can tell you from the Gunnison Basin perspective that most of, virtually all but 2 of our municipalities are below a minimum standard for compliance with state requirements. And the math we've done shows that conserving water in these small communities is not a productive exercise. The amount of water that results from conservation doesn't equal or even come close to meeting the cost of creating that conservation effort. And it doesn't contribute very much to the problem, to the solution to the problem, I should say. So on a local level, we're not thinking very hard about municipal conservation. There are a couple of exceptions. Lake City is an example where they have a very old supply system, and as much of it leaks out as is delivered to the customers. And so that kind of improvement, infrastructure improvement to correct that kind of problem, which will result in conservation, is on the table. But in general, we don't see the value for the effort.
I assume you mean municipal conservation? So there will be an emphasis in the South Platts plan on municipal conservation. What you won't see is a suggestion for some type of mandate either within the South Platte Basin or statewide. What the city of Longmont does with its conservation program fits the customer base in Longmont and may not necessarily apply to what's going on in Fort Collins. So I think we can rally a kind of a common message around conservation. As Jim pointed out, Denver Water, which is spending an enormous amount of money in conservation, has sort of led the charge, and I think you're seeing a lot of communities kind of follow suit. The culture and the mindset of the customer base is evolving, mostly out of the media coming out of the Denver metro area. So they're expecting that of their utilities. And frankly, the housing market is changing and reflecting that as well. And so you're seeing the kind of the free market drive that. As Jim alluded to earlier, technology is changing a great deal. So you're seeing a lot of conservation happen passively and actively. 20% savings in a lot of cases since 2002, 2003. Can we squeeze more out? I believe we can. Will it be the end-all be-all to solve the gap problems? Perhaps not. Will we be in dire straits short of gunfire and everything else that happens in other really water-short areas? Hopefully we'll solve it before then.
Okay, I think we have one more, time for one more here. We'll take 2 more. Steve, I'll get you.
So I have a question on the force and effect of the individual basin plans and the statewide plan. You know, there's plans that have a direct bearing on decision-making related to implementation of the plans or the lack of implementation of the plans. You know, there's those kind of plans that you could call the wouldn't it be nice plans that have very little bearing on actual decision-making. And then there's the kind of plans that would have an effect, almost like a force of law effect on decision-making. So my question is, what do you see the force and effect being of the plans?
Each take a quick shot at that.
So you may have read, we had an area in the South Platte Basin that wanted to form its own state. So conversation around force and effect is a sensitive one. I think, you know, I for one have gone on record saying I was real nervous about the I in the Basin implementation plan, the implementation side. And will we have time to actually get down to talking about real implementation? I don't know that we'll have time for that. I think what you're going to see in the South Platte is really solidifying some of the common language and the areas of agreement that we have, and really emphasize what we feel like is necessary to really coalesce the state together and address that looming gap issue. What becomes of that in the context of a state water plan and how that becomes force and effect is not why I get paid as a roundtable chair. I don't think we get paid.
John?
Well, James in his talk earlier mentioned Senate Bill 115, where the legislature felt compelled to become part of the process, and they haven't let go of that. And I think you will see that once we do have something in the way of a coherent plan, legislators being legislators, they're going to look for ways to get a bite of the apple and find ways to create laws that will be in effect implementation of the plan. It's up to all of us to discourage them from that process, I think, but you know, that's the nature of the beast. That's something they feel compelled to do. But more importantly, I think what the plan will do is create what Jim referred to as the political will statewide to do something, to get some positive action that will respond to this looming crisis that we have in the 50-year horizon, and that will give us the inspiration to move forward with implementation.
I would endorse what John has just said. I think that hopefully the plan will be specific enough to some extent that we will have a direction to go. And the whole issue, I think, of legislation and how they view it and how they address it, I think is going to be critical.
Yeah.
You have to remember that roundtables don't have any power, except for the power of suggestion. And it's much like a chamber of commerce in a town like this, where the chamber actually has no power, but the individual stakeholders do, and the individual stakeholders come together on community needs, depending on where you are. It might be we got to clean up downtown. By the way, we need an industrial park outside of town to attract jobs. And when that manifesto comes out, then governmental and private enterprise mechanisms come together to try and create good things. So that's what we're working on, at least at the roundtable level, the power suggestion. And right now, I think the Colorado water plan that's going to emerge in 2015 will be the power of suggestion. And of course, yes, the legislature's out there ready to legislate on one good idea or bad idea or another.
Steve?
A question for Sean. Would you elaborate on the cultural barriers that you perceive to exist in the South Platte to the use of alternative transfer methods?
No.
Next question.
Is that a reporter from the Pueblo newspaper here? It's the one paper I haven't been in yet.
You will be now.
It's difficult to summarize. I think the greatest barrier to successful ATMs in the South Platte is the geographic vastness of the South Platte Basin. The available water supply, similar to the Colorado, is further downstream. The ability to do exchanges, there's too many dry up points to get it to where the demand is in the water treatment plants. You've got water quality concerns, and then within each of the ditches, culturally, you have some that are open to the idea of sharing water with their municipal friends, and others that are not. We've got ditches, say on the Pooter, for example, that it's analogous to dealing with one day and they're like North Korea, and another ditch just adjacent to them is like South Korea. And it's very difficult to strike global agreements that could really sizably make a difference for the type of gap that we're dealing with. Small, localized ATMs, absolutely. The South Platte Basin, we've got what were struck as 20-year leaseback agreements, and I know those aren't wildly popular for ATMs or looked at as a true ATM, but 20-year lease agreements that were struck 15 years ago, and they probably still won't grow into them within the 5 years, so it's conceivable they'll extend out another 10 years. So that is water sharing back and forth at reasonable cost for the both sides of the deal. So I think there's opportunities localized, but not to the scale that would really make a sizable difference for the gap that the South Platte's looking at.
Okay, and I'm sure those of you in Arkansas always get along quite well, don't you, Steve? All right. Well, at this point, we've run out of time, but these four gentlemen will be around most of the day, and I encourage you to visit with them as you can and help me thank them for their time this morning.